All right, so let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born? So why don't we start with Liz?
Where and when was I born? Okay, I was born in Charleston, West Virginia
Oh,
in January of 1953.
and does that make you a Capricorn?
It does.
And do you feel like someone who's grounded and hardworking and goal-oriented and likes to garden, maybe?
Maybe Warren could answer that as an objective bystander here.
Well, she is as goal-oriented and as hardworking as the two women I married were extremely goal-oriented and hardworking, and Liz is right up there at the very upper 1/10 of 1% of hardworking. In fact, the biggest tension area between the two of us is I want to take vacations. And she says, well, okay, we could maybe do this weekend this year. Well, it's a little exaggerating, but I have to do all the social planning in order to get us to be away from work all the time.
Interesting. Huh. Did you have siblings, Liz?
Yes, I have one younger brother who's a couple years younger.
And that's another pattern, is that firstborn girls like you and me tend to be achievers.
Mm. Are you a Capricorn too?
No, I'm a Gemini, but my son is a Capricorn, so I've lived with one. But I read an interesting study that firstborn girls, their fathers are really supportive and encouraging, even though they treat their wives very traditionally, but they aspire for their daughters. So I thought that was an interesting, and it certainly fit in my family.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it fits in mine too.
Yeah.
Your dad, though, your mom was worked and taught.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So,
sure.
I mean.
But my dad was very supportive and encouraging of me.
Yes.
In relation to, career and education and cultural expansion and various things. Athletics.
Yeah. I don't know if you want your assistant in the background.
Yeah. Amy, why don't you just leave that? Or Amy,
Carly.
I'm sorry, Carly. Why don't you just leave that for now?
And Warren, and when were you born?
I was born, as you know, in 1943, and I was born in New York, in Queens.
Mm-hmm. And you have a younger brother and an older sister?
A younger brother, a late younger brother, and a younger sister, also 2 years younger.
So you're a firstborn achiever as well.
We were both, my sister and I were both June 26 born, but 2 years apart.
Wow, that's amazing.
So imagine how good the teasing was of my parents. You could, one day a year, eh?
Oh, that's funny. And then what about your education and career paths? Liz, how did you end up being a businesswoman?
Well, I went to West Virginia University and graduated with a degree in journalism, emphasis in public relations. After I graduated, which was in the mid-'70s, I scouted around for opportunities, PR opportunities in my home state of West Virginia. They weren't plentiful. So I began looking elsewhere. I had a friend who moved to Oregon, and he happened to see an ad in the paper for an ad for the Oregon Association of Realtors for a PR director. And so he said, maybe you'd like to apply for this. So I sent my very limited resume, and they called. I talked to them, and they said, well, we'd be interested in speaking with you. So I said, great. And so I flew out to Oregon. Actually, I flew and moved to Oregon. And I did the interview, and I told the interview group that was talking to me that I planned on getting this job because I'd moved to Oregon from West Virginia.
No pressure.
For the purpose of getting this job. Fortunately, I got it.
Yes.
And that started me on my PR career path, of which I've, done various PR jobs in Oregon, and then moved to Southern California and have worked for various institutions, and ultimately started my own PR firm now 30 years ago, and it was probably one of the first virtual PR firms established 30 years ago because there wasn't even an internet at that point. And so my colleague and I began working together from our home offices. He was a former journalist, and so we started Dowling and Dennis Public Relations, and I've been doing that ever since.
And what have you found, if anything, has changed in terms of being respected as the CEO? I mean, since you had a male partner, did people want to talk to him, or how has the gender played out, if it has?
Well, I've always been kind of a team player with men that I've worked with, and so we did everything as a team. I had more of the media orientation as far as placing media, dealing with the interactions with media, reporters and editors, and he was the one that did more of the writing side of our business because he was a former journalist. So we were very complimentary. We did meetings with clients together, either on the phone or in person or on the internet eventually. But it's never been an issue for me in terms of having a male-female challenge, gender challenge between us. I've always felt really strongly that we both can be complementary and bring strengths to a working team. So I have enjoyed it.
Great.
And you didn't feel like people were wanting to speak with him more than you?
No.
Okay, cool. How did you manage having two babies, two daughters, and combining a management position?
Well, that was tough, I'll tell you. I was I had gotten a divorce from my husband that I had the two children with, and the girls were maybe 5 and 6 years old, and so I had decided at that point that I didn't want to have to travel away from them and go into the city, so to speak, for work, that I wanted to try and establish, work where I could do something from home. And so that's when I started my PR business and recruited my partner to work with. And the challenges were that, I had essentially a nanny who worked with us and lived in my house. And without her, I couldn't have done it because it would have been too tough, especially with little ones, and wanting to run in and out of the office.
Mommy.
Yeah. So she handled things for the most part during the day, and then, but it was still a tug. I felt like, here I had just gotten divorced. I was trying to start a business, and you want to spend the time with the kids because now they aren't having time with their dads as much. And so I, did the best I could, but it was always a struggle, kind of emotionally, it was a struggle for me.
What's interesting to me is they're finding that parents are spending more time with their kids now than they did like in the 50s. So there's more expectations that you should make your own bread and, I don't know, make the baby food and all these expectations for parents. So I think parents of both genders feel like they're never doing enough. There's always some guilt. Warren, when did you come into the scene? How old were the girls?
The girls were 6 and 7 when I discovered Liz, and Liz and I just had our 27th anniversary from the day we met last night. And so it was May 27th May 12th of 27 years ago. And so 1994. And so that was really, and that it happened because when I moved to San Diego, a fellow interviewed me from the local paper. And that the paper, he quit his job or left his job at that paper some time later. And Liz found out that he had left the job and called him and sort of tempted him into being her partner at the firm that became Dowling and Dennis. His name was Greg Dennis. And so when he interviewed me, we discovered that he was a tennis player and I was too. And so we became tennis partners. And so when Liz got the divorce, he said to me, my partner just got a divorce and I had just broken up with a relationship. And so that got the two of us to come together. We had a sort of funny, weird introductory events, which were really fun in retrospect.
What was that?
Well, let's see. I called Liz, and so the fellow said, give Liz a call. So I did, and I left a message, and she called back. But my answering machine said, please leave your first name and last name, because my assistant often answers the phone, and leave your phone number even if I know it. And since Liz had felt that she was calling back relatively soon after I called, she just said, Liz calling. And so the message I got from my assistant was Liz called. But my last girlfriend had been named Liz. And so I called my former woman friend, Liz, and said, hi, great to hear from you. And she goes, well, it's nice to hear from you too, but I didn't call. But, we had a nice conversation. And I thought, well, that's weird. And so then share about the library and things like that.
A month later, I talked to my business partner, Greg, and I said, whatever happened to that friend of yours, Warren? I called him and he never called me back. And Greg goes, that's odd. That doesn't sound like Warren. I'll check with them. So he said that at their next tennis game. So at the next tennis game.
Well, share about the incident that led you to thinking about me.
Well, yes, there was one little incident I forgot. So what prompted me to even ask Greg about this was I was taking the girls to the library, and as I was going towards the front doors of the library, there's these little newsstands, that they used to put newspapers in, you could buy. Okay, so there was a newsstand with a Learning Annex magazine in it, and Warren was on the cover. I had never seen Warren before. I knew nothing about what he looked like, but I just knew, looking at that, without seeing his name on the cover, that was him. I went up to it and confirmed, yes, that's
a good story. That's a good story.
But he never called me.
That's the jerk. So at that point, Greg, when we started playing tennis again, he confronted me on that. And I said, no, I called her. She didn't call me back. And, talk about credibility. I just had zero credibility. Liz wouldn't tell me that she called you and you wouldn't call back. You didn't call back if that wasn't the case. You could admit when you're wrong, you didn't do something. No, actually, I didn't. Blah, blah, blah. And I had zero credibility. So you can see the female-male credibility level there. And so even this is my best friend. And so we played tennis, and I said, you think she'd mind if I called back? And he said, duh. Call her back. And so I called her back and invited her over, said I'd make dinner for her, invited her over. I opened the door from my home and saw Liz on the front step and went, yes. I had this immediate sort of attraction, draw, connection feeling to her.
It was a great blind date.
Wow.
For all the problems of not calling initially.
Well, then you appreciated each other once you met.
Yes.
And then how long did you date before you figured, this is going to be a lifetime commitment? We're really serious about this.
Liz?
8 years.
Oh. Well, let me ask in a different way. When did you decide to live together?
8 years.
8 years. Because I had children, we didn't live together, prior to marriage. We got married and then merged households. So it wasn't, and we had a little bit of off and on during those 8 years, maybe, a total of probably 6 to 9 months of not being together in 8 years.
Yeah, something like that. We had different, Liz is very Christian in her orientation, and she's very much a mother bear with the children. I'm more sort of like, a little bit more tough love in my orientation, boundary enforcer type of person. And so we had a lot of challenges about different ways that we thought the children would be optimally brought up. And also one of the children, Alex, she very, very, very much wanted Liz to get back together with her biological dad. And she even drew pictures of her dad as a frog and her mom as a frog and her as a little baby frog in the background. And the dad frog saying, I love Liz, I love mommy. The mommy frog saying, I love daddy. And the little frog in the background, her just wishing for them, waiting for them to sort of get back together again. And so Alex liked me the first time or two that we played together and were with each other. But as soon as I stayed overnight, she knew it was very different for me than it was with the former guys that Liz dated. And then I became the enemy. And she was really good, and she did everything she could, and because to get rid of me, and Liz is very, very much a feeling person, and when Alex was hurting and in pain, it obviously gave Liz great pain, and so it was like Liz was constantly being torn between her desire to be involved with me and her desire to be a good mom and to be protective and loving and so on. The other daughter, who was adopted, she took to me right away, but she was a real intellectual, and she didn't have that connection, that biological connection of her biological father and mother were not the ones at stake. It was somebody different. And so, and then she was very traumatized by Liz and I breaking up. And after the third time we broke up, she had been so attached to me. She said she didn't want to get attached to me again because she was afraid that she was going to lose me again. And so there was a very different dynamic. And sweetie, if I have misstated anything, or would you have a different version of any of that?
I think that was well said.
So the reason that you waited 8 years to get married and move in was because of Alex, essentially, and her getting adjusted.
I don't know that was why we waited 8
that
years.
was one of the factors,
reasons.
right?
He didn't ask me until 8 years.
So unable to ask yourself. No, it was really more of a dual. I think it was more of a dual dynamic. We loved each other a lot, but we were also had the different styles of bringing up the children. We really fundamentally disagreed on good portions of that and the dynamics that I just mentioned. And so, but we at the same time, almost every night we were talking about problems that we had confronted because of the children or the things that the children needed. And so I was very much involved in the process, but I was never more than an advisor. And Liz usually agreed with my solutions, but her way of being was far more protective. And so she might agree with what should be done that I would think of as enabling, and she would but not be able to not do that way. Or she would set the boundary but not enforce it because it was creating tension, and also she was overwhelmed with her work and trying to support them because she was not getting much in terms of financial support, and the biological dad of one and the adoptive father of the other had moved away to about 400 miles away. And so he did move. We sent him a copy of the father and child reunion book, and that seemed to be one of many factors that seemed to get him to move back and share how he moved back for a while with the girls.
Mm. Well, he moved back to our location, and Warren and I were, dating at that point in time, and so I had an extra room in my house, and so he lived with us for probably about 6 or 8 months until he found a place that he could, live on by himself, and it was a really good experience for the girls and stuff to have him back, not only in town but in their environment. And I think the tough part was on Warren because, having my ex there living with us wouldn't be optimum, but it really made a difference in the girls' lives.
How long did it take for Alex to kind of get used to you, Warren?
I'd say a few years ago. It's been about 22, 23 years. I'd say, after we got married, she increasingly, I think, moved fairly quickly after we got married, but she described us as once as being oil and water. I was more like a thinking, question, curious person, and she was more like give me the answer person. And but she's changed, and then she went to a massage therapy school that was very holistic in its orientation. And she made a huge leap forward to sort of seeing the world in a more holistic type of way, with a lot of curiosity seemed to emanate from her at that point that had never been there before. And so since then, and I'd say we've gotten closer and closer. That would be my, but there's still a fundamental difference that I think she feels. She doesn't ever express it, but I just pick it up from her, the body language, and it's very subtle. But I've been a very strong supporter of her in the last years, and I think that has helped her feel extremely supported by me. So that's my interpretation. What would you say, sweetie?
I think that's generally fair. I think, she just this was her biological father, and he and I split up, and I think it was hard on both girls, but it was especially hard on her. She was the younger of the two, only by 8 months. And I think she just deeply missed her dad and was so hopeful of us getting back together. So I think that's why she struggled a lot with Warren. And, when you build that kind of foundation, it was, I think, hard to kind of move out of that as she's gotten, she has moved out of it as she's gotten older, but it's it's kind of a lifelong challenge, I guess, to not be raised by your biological dad.
Right.
And my style was also different. Like when we'd come out of a movie and I'd say, okay.
When they're 9 years old. Okay, let's talk about this movie.
Yeah, right.
What did it mean to you? What did you like about it? What did you dislike about it? And Alex would go, well, just let us enjoy the movie. Do we have to analyze everything? Or she'd come back and she'd have a problem in math or something like that. And I would want to walk her through, how do you think that, what do you know, what do you not know, and lead her to helping her discover the conclusions and making the connection. And she just quit and go, I'm going to go to mom and get the answer, type of thing. And Liz would basically agree with my way of doing it, but usually because she was trying to make a living and had a project that she was behind on, it was like, okay, I'll give you the answer this time, because she, the daughter, would say that she was really stressed, and Liz didn't want to see her as being stressed, and so that combined with the work led to her sort of like, okay, this time I'll give you the answer, but next time I won't. And so that was sort of a dynamic difference. That made Alex much more interested in just going to mom than going to and trying to avoid me as much as possible.
Right. How did it work out, Liz, with your faith in Christianity. Did it bother you that Warren didn't have the same beliefs? Was that an issue or not?
No, it was not. It's never been an issue for us. We've always respected, I think, each other's approach to spirituality, and Warren has been very supportive of both me and the kids in terms of how our value system as it relates to our spiritual life. To the point, even though he was more Buddhist in his orientation, he was he would do prayers at night with the girls. We do prayers at dinner time. We went to church together. He was very supportive, even though it was not his belief system, and so it never has created a rift or anything between us because we just both respect each other from that standpoint.
Fair enough. And
a
Buddhists
funny,
pray.
yes, right. A funny incident related to this was Erin, who is the adoptive daughter and a very bright, questioning young girl. When I think she was about 9 years old, she said, "I don't get this. You're the one that organizes the prayers, but you don't believe in God. How does that work?" And so I said to her, "Well, because I feel that praying is really a wonderful way of creating a setting to express feelings, and we're all here to support each other, and our support system, my God, is the family, and all of us listening to each other and being here to support each other." And she got it like that. Oh, okay, got it. And as soon as I explained that, then the mystery disappeared for her, and it made perfect sense.
Yeah, it was a good question. It was a logical question. Yeah. So you've both been married before. What did you learn from your first marriage? And some people say in these times you kind of have to have more than one marriage to really get it.
So what did we individually learn from our prior spouses? Well, I think I learned that I needed a man in my life who was someone that would listen to my problems that I might have with work or the kids or just with life in general, and wouldn't try and solve my problems for me. And that I wanted somebody who was a good listener and a very empathetic person, but not someone who felt like if I was venting my emotions and challenges that he had to, now I've got to take this on and solve it for her. Not that I think my first husband, he had a lot of great attributes, but I feel that he was burdened by my problems. And rather than letting me just kind of vent and solve my own issues, he took that on. And Warren is exceptional when it comes to that. And I just I don't know. I just fell in love with Warren, with all that he is and who he is and what he is about. So I don't know. How could you not love Warren Farrell?
Right. Did you and your first husband go to counseling?
We did. We did go to counseling.
And the therapist said, you don't have to solve her problems, just do active listening. But that didn't work?
We did. We actually went to counseling together. We went to counseling individually. And that did not work for us. He wasn't really willing to devote a lot of energy to it, and perhaps I wasn't either. I don't know. By the time we got into counseling was maybe too late. Warren does a couples communication workshop that he and I practice, and I think if my first husband and I had that tool, chances are we could have worked through our issues.
I'm so glad I didn't give them that tool.
But I think it's so important for, a couple to be able to interact on not only the great things that happen to them and their family, but also the horrible things and the big challenges, and have a way to be able to talk about it. And even, you have anger moments and so forth, and you got to have some tools that you can deal with yourselves, and you don't have to always seek out a therapist to, mediate that for you or to negotiate it for you. So that's been a real strength of, I think, our relationship, and it's a tool I wish I'd had for many, many years.
We'll get into the tools, but first, Warren, what did you learn from your first wife, who was a computer analyst, brain analytical type, it sounds like?
Yes. She was, when she was at the point where she was about to become a vice president of IBM, we were thinking about, and she eventually became the executive vice president of American Express. So she was, she moved into a very, very high corporate position. But she was very clearly on her way. She'd been a White House fellow. And so after she became a White House fellow, the IBM just started moving her leaps and bounds forward because they sort of saw her value. And so, we were thinking about having children. And I said, but I had already been doing a lot of workshops with women's movement and couples workshops and things like that. And and I was beginning to see how a lot of couples thought that once they would have children, and that would sort of solve their problems, that would bring them together. But I saw that was almost never the case, and that if anything, you had to have a much deeper foundation to survive all the conflicts and the tensions and the time suck that children bring about, which is really no big surprise to anybody today. But at that time, I sort of was seeing that around me. And so I said to her, well, before we have children, let me ask the question, if I were to die tomorrow and you eventually remarried, would you probably marry somebody, or would you seek out somebody like me, or would you seek out somebody like another IBM executive? And she didn't really hesitate very much. She said, I think I'd feel more understood by another IBM executive. We'd have more in common. And so I said, I understand. And she reversed it and said, you? And I said, I think feel I'd have more in common with another set of psychology type, or somebody who was into human relationships, expressed emotions more, and that type of thing. And so and that sort of led us to sort of feeling like, wow, in a way we're very glad we discovered this before we had children. On the other hand, that tells us a lot. So that started us on a year or two of counseling. And seeing whether we could bridge this over, or whether, because we really loved each other a lot, and we supported each other very, very effectively, and so we didn't want to just willy-nilly just go on and break up. But after a year or two of counseling, and then we also had an open marriage, and the open marriage was great for our growth, but it was terrible for intimacy. And it didn't really help us sort of bond and deepen our relationship. And so those two things, I think, were things that moved us in different directions. And also, I needed more emotional sustenance. And she had a very strong German background with all the stereotypical things that go along with that. And I was more Irish, and I'll expressive, and I'll cry at the drop of a sadness, and that type of thing. And so we were very different at a very core emotional level, and so the respect was there, but I think it wasn't quite enough to make us feel like we were really emotionally connected at the level that both of us had come to be able to allow ourselves to experience, because we were both successful enough that we didn't have to sort of cling on to each other for success purposes. I was much more successful at that point in my life than I am now, and she was obviously moving up a ladder very quickly, but she enjoyed that ladder. It gave her goals, it gave her fulfillment, it gave her something to look forward to, and she would always tell me, just give me a quota for anything and I'll fulfill it. And that's, and she meant that emotionally in every way, shape, or form. And for me, I didn't want to live by quotas or obligations like that. It was more, a bit more emotional and nuanced than that for me. But that was not her style. And so,
if you had the tools, same question that Liz answered, if you'd had the tools that you have now, do you think your first marriage would have survived, or were you too different?
I think the first marriage probably would have survived if I had the tools that I have now.
Oh, wow. Well, then I want to get to the tools after this question. 70% around of the divorces in the U.S. are initiated by women. I want to know what you two think is going on there. Why is that?
Since this is my field, I want you to speak from your heart rather than from the professional type of
Okay, so why are women initiating most of the divorces?
Did you initiate your divorce?
No, I did not.
Definitely not.
And it's being a more traditional woman, I guess, it's hard for me to kind of believe that women do initiate 70% of the time. I guess I can understand it intellectually that now that women are working, they have the wherewithal to be able to leave a marriage financially more easily. But I would never have probably initiated my breakup because I guess intuitively understood the importance of the children having both parents. And so that was really important to me. And
was there another woman in the picture for your husband?
Yes. So I find it fascinating, though, that women are leaving marriages that often and with that propensity. It's considering, I would think they, would want to have both the husband and themselves involved in raising their children. They brought them into the world together, and it seems to me that, parents owe that to their children. But
what I hear a lot from women is they think the man is a couch potato and they're doing the work. They're working outside the home, they're managing the household, and he's watching sports and yelling at the football team. And I think that for a lot of them it's like, I give up. And I if he's not in as a team, why not do it myself without having to take care of him too? He's my third child or whatever it is. Warren, what do you think? What do you hear?
I think that's what I hear a lot. I don't think that's what's going on completely, but I think that is certainly what women tell themselves and what women feel and experience. I think that there's, for me, what's going on is, it is that historically speaking and biologically, women have married men who can produce economically and who can, because survival was the big controlling issue. And if you had children, you better darn well have a breadwinner that could provide for you and the children. And in a more traditional culture and time period, women, no matter how gifted and creative they were not, they weren't encouraged to be the astronaut, the lawyer, the doctor, and so on. And then even if they were, they tended to give it up when they were raising children. And statistically speaking, not usually go back to it. And so there was an enormous economic dependency. And so women fell in love with security. Men fell in love with women. And women fell in love with that. And men, when we fell in love with women in part because we couldn't talk with each other as men. If we had feelings that we shared, if I was in trouble in my marriage and I was a vice president of a bank and I told the other assistant vice president, that I was having trouble in my marriage, they say, "Oh, sorry, Warren, to hear about that. That's too bad." And then, how did you handle that last customer? Should we do this? Da da da. Da. And we're back to the business again. If I tell a friend, it's like a few minutes, and then, what happened to the Celtics last night? Should we, or maybe why don't we go out to a bar? I feel sorry for Warren. Come over to our
buy
house
him a beer.
buy him a beer, or watch the game with me. So and so I'm helping by putting you in a field in company and preoccupying you with something like that. It wasn't like something like tell me more, tell me more, tell me more.
Interesting.
But whereas women had very well honed security support systems, like if a woman says to another woman, I'm having trouble with my husband or whatever. And then they'll be more listening for a while. But if she says, I broke up with my boyfriend, I broke up with my husband, the other woman will go, oh, I'm kind of glad you did, because really you are so much worth more than that man. And I could never quite understand why you were with him, or he was flirting with me at a party, or I just felt that this, just consider this, sweetie, a door that's closing, and an opportunity for you to really find somebody who's worthy of you, much more likely to be supportive in that way. Whereas guys will last for and they'll talk for a couple of minutes, and if the guy presses with his grief, men will support each other by very quickly moving to something along the lines of, well, what did you do? What was your responsibility? How are you the part of the problem?
Oh.
We'll confront each other very quickly about our responsibility, because what men are about is accountability and responsibility.
And problem solving.
And problem solving, and not complaining and not whining. All those things go together to create a non-supportive environment for the man. And so what we know now is that that men and women, when we break up from a long-term relationship, or even a month or two relationship, after the relationship moves from sex to love, it's harder on the man, depression-wise. When we measure depression in more ways than just measuring it in the ways that women express it, then we see that the men go through a longer period of grief and have a harder time recovering from that. So on the economic, the 70-80% statistics, 70% is the females initiating divorce, 80%, 82% is the data for women with college education initiating divorces. So the more education and more income the woman has, the more free she is from that. What partially feeds that is a culture of not understanding at all what men do, go through, are about, or experience. And so, for example, we both know Arlie Hochschild wrote a book called The Second Shift, and that reinforces the type of thing that women were telling you, that he's just sitting on the couch, blah blah blah, doing that type of thing, and I feel like I have a third child. Very common thought. And when I did the research for Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, I started to, I already knew some different ways that men contributed to the home, but it wasn't the word that was used to the contributions that fathers make or men make was not appropriate to be called housework, because men's contribution to the home was almost always contributions outside of the home. That is, they would help repair the roof, they'd put up the windows, they'd take down the screens, they'd clean out the gutters, they'd we hear taking out the garbage, but that's a tiny little fraction of it. They would be available to do, when something broke down, they would fix it. If somebody, the honey-do list, yes, was very much likely to be made by the woman and executed by the man. And then there were lots of very subtle things that, the yard work, but much more subtly was if the two people were like out late at night, they went to a party, and they were both a little bit high and tired, and blood sugar was low, and almost invariably the man would drive back, or if they're going on a trip with the family, he'd be more likely to pack up the car and that type of thing. And as they're going on that trip, if they're going through a dangerous city like San Francisco or something like that, it was almost never said, but he would do the driving through the dangerous part, or his night might be foggy, or it was dangerous. Whatever dangers were happening, he would take the responsibility. in the culture, there is zero, and I mean zero, appreciation for that. And so the woman understandably thinks that she's doing all the work because she's not, the dad may drive the kids to school, and so on. Except for the driving the kids to school, Arlie Hochschild measured none of what I just mentioned. Who drives, and didn't calculate that into the time figure. Neither did Joseph Black. The people that did the research in these areas left out 52, and I mean 52 areas of contributions that men do more typically than women do to the home. And the average woman, when I ask her that question, they can usually mention take out the garbage, and that's it. And that's only a portion of one of the 52 contributions. When I did that, when I wrote that chapter in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say, my father said, "This is ridiculous. You shouldn't write a chapter like this. This is complaining. We just do this. We don't talk about this." He was annoyed at me for articulating what people like him did.
Wow.
He would come home. He would leave in the morning at 7 and get home at 7 in the evening from New York. And yes, and he worked. But oftentimes men will take jobs that they like less that pay more because they pay more. So they're more like, and that's the single biggest contribution that men make. So the father and mother may both be working, but the chances are fairly good that the mother's working closer to home, taking a job she likes and finds fulfilling on the fulfillment scale. And so you see this with when the Rochester Institute of Technology studied men and women who had their own businesses. In their own businesses, they don't have bosses that devalue the women because it's their own business. And so that's a really good measure. These were all controlled for all these women, and men had MBAs. So you didn't have men with high degrees and women with low degrees. And so when controlling for that, the women who owned their own business earned only 49% of what the men earned. And so then you go deeper into that and say, well, why is that? And the women said, well, so the part of that study was, when you created your own business, what was your purpose in creating your own business? And the women said, well, my purpose was I wanted flexibility. I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted something that was fulfilling for me.
And time for my kids, like Liz.
My kids, exactly. And fifth down the list was money. And whereas for men, money was number one on the list, no surprise. And things like being your own boss were way down the list. Flexibility, fulfillment, they were down on the list. And so none of that understanding of, yes, we may both work, but did one of us give up being that elementary school teacher that we loved being to become a superintendent of schools because we learned when we had children that there'd be twice as much money by being a superintendent of schools, but although we hated administration. No one is asking these questions of men, and therefore women are sort of going around feeling hurt and unappreciated. So it's a lose, and then often with divorces, they feel that they want the children. So the good news is they get the children. The bad news is they feel overwhelmed. And so the women are overwhelmed, the fathers are often feeling left out and purposeless, and the children have one parent, which predicts a much worse life. And so that's the political, economic, social, cultural situation that we're in now that leads to so many women feeling so angry at so many men.
You know what's interesting, though, is that divorce rates, people with high incomes are more likely to stay married, and low income, like blue collar workers, are more likely to get divorced. And all I can think is if you're stressed, then the marriage is more fragile, because if you're stressed thinking about how am I going to pay the bills, the rent, the whatever. So
Sure.
Do you think that's why people who have higher incomes are less likely to divorce? It's a significant difference.
Yeah, I think it's I think that's part of it. Although I've also seen that women with college educations are more likely to initiate divorce. So I don't know exactly where where those two things combine, but certainly what I see more is that when a man does not produce a decent amount of income, that's when if he's not producing about as much as she is, and he doesn't have the type of emotional intelligence that she would like, combined with the other things you just mentioned, that makes the couple very vulnerable for a divorce.
There's Sue Johnson does therapy, Canadian, and she says the common pattern is the woman pursues for intimacy, and the man withdraws, and then she pursues more, and he withdraws more. So she's saying, I want you more involved, I want more emotional whatever, and it just becomes a downward spiral. So I think we need to talk about your communication systems. Mm-hmm. And you really focus on conflict resolution, that's the core that would allow people to stay married, which would allow kids to have access to their dads. So let's talk about the communication system you two are doing.
Yes. Good. Sweetie, want to share a little bit about your experience with it?
Yeah. So Warren, when we first got together, he was essentially evolving the caring and sharing program that he teaches now, both to...
And you were the guinea pig.
Degree, maybe.
Let's hope so.
But, he began teaching it at Esalen, and he's taught it at Omega and a number of places around the country, as well as coached, private couples on this, as well as we certainly have used it in our marriage. And it's a wonderful tool to be able to actually interact with your partner and resolve an issue that you may have felt hurt about or unheard about, and to be able to do it when you both can come together and sit down and in a what Warren calls kind of a what's the name of it?
Caring and sharing?
Well, no, not the caring and sharing, but where you go inside yourself and become, the setup for it. There's a term used.
You mean the conflict-free, sustaining the conflict-free zone?
No, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry about that.
But getting centered is what.
Meditate. So the six mindsets.
The mindsets,
right. Is the word you're looking for.
So the mindsets that allow each of you to kind of get in a space to be receptive and to hear the other one. And so that was really something that I had never experienced before, because, when you tend to escalate, when things happen, you get your feelings hurt or something doesn't go the way you think it's supposed to go. And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're both yelling at each other and nothing is really resolving appropriately or easily. And so Warren has created a system that, allows you to kind of put things on hold as opposed to escalation, to be able to center yourself at a time that you both agree, and then kind of go through in a give and take format to be able to express yourself, to be heard, and, to really feel like my partner understands what I'm dealing with. And that is one of the greatest gifts that your partner can give you, is to just, listen to your issue. And I think, that's what I was saying kind of earlier, is that even though my first husband was pretty good about listening to me, I never really felt heard, because he just kind of took it and tried to solve my problem for me. But it's more about just listening and feeling like the other person has empathy and understanding of what you're dealing with. Not that they have to solve that problem for you. So I learned so much about better communication even though I'm in a communication field, by, what Warren and I practice on a very regular basis.
How about if we do a little demo? And let's say Warren says, I think we should go away for a week and have fun, no work. And Liz says, but no, I have these things scheduled. And so could we have a little mock demonstration of how these principles would work?
Yes, here's how. First, I wouldn't say that until caring and sharing time. Because if I said that, aside from sort of just generally saying, saying something like that, I would, if I really wanted to make sure that Liz heard me, my underlying work starts from the assumption that it's as soon as somebody makes a suggestion for a change of behavior or attitude, even though the person making that suggestion feels that they're making a suggestion to improve the relationship, the person hearing the request for a change in behavior and attitude is feeling criticized. And that you should, and that, so my ideal would be to make note of that, and to, before Liz and I talk about that, it would be during this caring and sharing time. So let me before I do the mock-up of that, which I'm happy to do, let me sort of give you the overall understanding of that. Okay. Yes, go ahead, sweetie.
I have something else I have to do because we're at our hour limit. Can we plan for another 20 minutes or whatever it is after this? But I need to get back to my work.
Sure.
So can we stop this at this point and then pick it up whenever?
Yes, but what I'd like to do is Warren can keep going with the stages.
Keep going, sure.
And then we'll pick up with you, and you and I will figure out a good time.
That would be great.
Thank you, Liz. It's lovely to meet you.
Okay, so nice to meet you, Gail.
Thank you, sweetie. It's lovely to meet
you. Liz, would you do me a favor and move that box, that white box?
I sure will.
It just bothers me.
Sure. Is it because it's white?
No, it's because it doesn't belong there. It offends my sense of order. Okay, so number one is?
Oh, yes. So first, I don't believe the work I do is not about conflict resolution. It's ideally about conflict prevention, which doesn't, but that doesn't mean it's about criticism prevention, because there needs to be room for criticism. So I have to, and what I see, the reason I got into doing this is I felt that there was active listening was not working for couples that did not do it in the setting of a therapist. And so I started asking myself, what's happening here? And what's happening was that the person having the complaint or the problem felt very well listened to, but the person being criticized had their defenses taken away, which are biologically natural, and then had to repeat the things that she or he was being criticized. So you're not only taking away the defenses, you're then without defenses, feeling the pain of the criticism to a greater degree. Now it works to some degree, but when there's a therapist around, there's sort of a security blanket that does allow people to do it, and it's fairly effective. But I wanted to create a system where people could, who didn't have to pay a therapist to do it. So the system I've set up is one that any couple can do, and I'm now in the process of beginning to work out how to distribute that to poor communities all around the country, so that people can do this on their own. So what I set up is 166 hours a week of a conflict-free zone, and then 2 hours a week to take care of the single biggest concern that has come up during the week that you want to have your partner listen to. And so so during the conflict-free zone, if you and your partner make, say, a sarcastic remark or a criticism, you have a choice. You can sort of discuss it there. But if you're noticing energy go through you and you're becoming defensive, you then visualize, I have an opportunity here. I can either explain my position, get into an argument, have it escalate, and have both of us feel pretty bad, and barely talking with each other maybe, or at the worst case scenario, it results in physical abuse. Or alternatively, I can bring my concern up, or my response to the criticism I just heard. I can bring that up during caring and sharing time, which is the other 2 hours a week. And then I know that my partner, before I say anything, is going to alter her biologically natural defensive state, or I will alter my biologically natural defensive state, and I'll meditate on, I'll go through a series of 6 meditations that will connect me with the advantages of completely hearing my partner and put me into a different emotional mindset that will take me away from my biologically natural propensity to respond defensively to criticism. So I will say to myself, okay, and these are all things I prepare people in the workshop to do by doing little experiences before they get to these meditation state.
Like focus on your breathing or relax your muscles.
Yes, that's just that is not even one of the 6 meditations. That's just assumed. Before you start this, you do that. But then the 6 meditations that are different from what other people ask people to do is so. For example, I do a little experience in the room where I ask the male and the female, or the 2 females or the 2 males, 2 people in the couple. A couple, by the way, is defined as anybody who has had a previous relationship that developed issues, and they want to have a future relationship with less conflict and more love. And so that could be a gay couple, or a father and a child, mother and child, etc. And then when I modify it for corporations, it's just any 2 people that work together and will need to be working together in the future that have developed misunderstandings. So, but that's a different modification. So on the love level, before I will have everybody in the room sit opposite each other, back to back, and to write on a piece of paper something that they know their partner will never see. And so, and the question is, if my partner was about to drown or in a car accident, and there was about 100% chance that she or he would die, but I intuited that if I could save them, but in the process of saving them, I'd have a 50% chance of dying myself, would I do it? And then the answer is yes, no, uncertain. Now remember, your partner is never going to see this. And so then I take it to another level and say, if your partner was about to die, etc., and you knew that you had a 50% chance of losing an arm or a leg, would you do it? Yes, no, uncertain. And about 95, now about the composition of my workshops is such that maybe a quarter of the people are there thinking about getting a divorce. Another quarter are there just purely for relationship enhancement. And the others are sort of having relationship problems, but it's not at the divorce level. So that's sort of the composition of the couples usually. And yet, despite that, 95% of the men say they would take a 50% chance of risking their life to save their partner, even though a quarter of them are about ready to get a divorce. And about 85% of the women say this. Now, the only thing that's subtracted from the equation is children. I say make believe there's no children involved, so that because otherwise mothers feel they want to be around for their children. And so with 6 meditations like that, another one is the love guarantee. Before I listen to Liz, I say, okay, if Liz feels, if I provide a safe environment for Liz, so that she can say anything she wants, no matter how exaggerated it is, no matter how angry she is, no matter that I am not here to criticize the way she says it or what she says or the accuracy of her story. I am here to provide a safe environment for her expressing whatever she wants, whatever way she wants, short of hitting me. Then if she feels that safe environment, she'll feel more loved by me. and therefore she'll feel more love for me. So I go through 6 meditations like that. The first one translates into, if I'm willing to die for Liz, certainly I can spend 20 minutes listening to her. And that's not quite as risky as death. And so I start putting myself in it. Wait a minute, here's a woman I would die for. She has a criticism. Sure, go for it. You're the person who's, I want to give you life. Because I would give you life even at the expense of my own life, and listening to you is not going to be at the expense of my own life. And so with 6 meditations like that, by the end of those 6 meditations, I am ready to hear anything in any way, shape, or form, and vice versa. And so, but what I'm saying is, because hearing criticism is biologically unnatural, that you have to alter your biologically naturally defensive state before you hear criticism. That makes you, the recipient of criticism, feeling safe and knowing that there's nothing but advantage that will come to you and nothing but deepening of your love that will happen between the two of you. And therefore, unlike an act of listening, you are feeling very emotionally secure about knowing that this criticism is going to end up deepening your love. And so therefore, what's the problem? Whereas in active listening, you don't know that. You haven't prepared for an alternative defense. And so that's the system. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg of the system. I share throughout the course a lot of insights, but I make it clear that that insights are good for an overall understanding of how to conduct your life. But at the moment you're criticized, all the insights disappear. And because the power of being criticized by your loved one is greater than your intellectual insights. And so I say that this course is really useless if you don't do it with your partner or with your parent or your somebody in your life that you love. But once you do it with somebody you love, then you really you're left with the entire structure of being able to not resolve conflict, but prevent it. Because before I say what I'm going to be concerned with to Liz, I'll do certain things to sustain my upset that is much more complex. The sustaining the conflict-free zone. And then by the time I get to Liz, it's only one thing that I share. And before I share those 2 things, I'll be sharing 2 appreciations of her. And after I share those 2 things, I'll be sharing 2 more appreciations of her. And I teach people how to appreciate, which is a deep dive into appreciation. I never say things like, "Oh, you're a good cook," but I really like the way you cook the turkey. I like the way the skin is really crisp. What type of, you seem to have gotten the turkey very moist. Was that oregano or thyme or sage that you used there? How did you do that? What's the recipe? So I teach people to have the discipline of 7 levels of being specific when they appreciate each other, so the person feels not just seen in general, but seen in a very specific type of way. And so those are the things that we practice.
You say to take a cinematic approach. So that's when I'm being criticized, I kind of look at it like a movie, a film is playing.
That is one of the 6 mindsets. So one of the mindsets is, think first of all when you're at a movie. And when you're at a movie, you might see the main character, let's say a young, innocent female walking down a dark alley at night, and the music in the movie is making it quite clear that she's soon going to be attacked by some evil person that you've seen before. And your stomach is all upset. But then you say to yourself, wait a minute, I don't need to have my stomach be upset. I'm only in a movie.
Yeah.
Okay, I can relax. So step 1 of the cinema is relaxing the tension and knowing that it's within you to be able to just let that go. So anything that your partner says to you, it's not coming out and physically hitting you. So therefore, there's no danger. Therefore, you can totally relax. Second, when you're at a movie, you don't stand up and argue with the characters. You just go for the ride. You go for the story. But in this movie, with your partner talking, here is the person you would die for. And she is talking, she's giving her story. So what's your job? To stand up and interrupt her? No. Your job is to hear out the movie. And here's the most important person in your life, and she is telling her story her way. And that's part of it. So your job is just to be there for her story, not to interrupt her, not to leave early, and just to enjoy the ride of that story.
That's a good image. You say the 5 rules of the game are your tone of voice, don't criticize back, just listen, don't ask why, share at least 4 positive for every negative. So tone of voice, it's not sarcastic. Is that what's the tone of voice?
Yeah, tone of voice. So in the that's for rules of the game for sharing criticism in your everyday life. If you want to minimize the possibility of making your partner defensive, then tone of voice is important. Sarcasm is a complex one, but I'll get to that in a moment. However, once you've meditated, then your tone of voice is not anything for me to complain about. So if you're my sister and you have an angry tone of voice and you're being sarcastic and you're putting me down, you're saying you're always this privileged brother that got all of Dad's attention. The only thing he cared about was you. We were twins, but yet Dad, put all his efforts and money into sending you to college and didn't even care about me going to college. And when I went to college, on and on. You're just a spoiled, self-centered, narcissistic asshole. And my job, listening to you, is to hear all that and to hear it, and just knowing that the worst. And here's the key thing that I teach on this issue: the angrier you are, the more I can see that is vulnerable. That behind that anger is vulnerability. That one of the core lessons of the weekend is that anger is vulnerability's mask. So if you're becoming sarcastic, angry, exaggerating, putting me down, I'm hearing vulnerability. Gail is feeling vulnerable, feeling that she was left out of Dad caring about her because he didn't send her to college, didn't prepare for her, didn't pay as much attention to her, on and on and on. I might have then so everything that we normally consider negative in regular. So I'm not encouraging anybody to be sarcastic or put somebody else down or exaggerate or be abusive or swear. I'm only saying that in this safe space, your job is to handle everything. And when you look, if I were to look at you as my sister with those eyes, if you could see that my eyes were seeing your vulnerability rather than being ready to hit you back, you would then begin to not have a reason to exaggerate, be angry, because you would feel my heart come toward you and that I'm emotionally hugging you. And so the propensity for you to be continuing to exaggerate in order to get my attention and make a point starts disappearing. All those negatives start disappearing the moment you're beginning to feel heard. And so one of the other meditations is a meditation called stream. So when in stream, I say that if you're, say, getting angry or exaggerating or sarcastic and whatever, abusive verbally, I take that as this is the pollution in a stream. And and my job is to hear you. And the moment I hear you, I am like a filter. The listening process filters out the pollution. And so what comes out the other side of that filter is the beautiful you without the pollution of the stream that I have created by my being able to supportively listen to you. That's another one of the mindsets.
So this is different than active listening because you do a preparation process with a specific time set aside. So we are prepared. We do the kind of meditation, so we're centered, and then we can essentially do active listening. But active listening without these preparations is too difficult.
It leaves the person being criticized feeling more vulnerable than she or he really wants to be. And it doesn't understand the biological propensity to be extremely sensitive to criticism, and therefore you need that therapist to sort of create that secure environment for that. And what I want is a couple to be able to do this on their own without having to pay $100 to $500 for a therapist, and make this, and then therefore to people who are economically not well-to-do not have to get divorces based on or have abusive marriages that the children then feel they don't even want to get married. This is going to happen.
What the guy who is the quote couch potato sitting on the couch watching sports, drinking his beer, he's tuned out. So why does that happen? What's going on that he's withdrawing like that?
Because he feels two reasons. One is that he just needs his time to relax, and then the more she is looking at him and saying, you haven't finished your to-do list. This I asked you to do the repairs that still haven't been done. The more she does that, the more tension he feels, the more he needs the relaxation. And so you have a sort of a vicious cycle going on there. And then he also, on a conscious/unconscious level, feels completely unappreciated for, yes, we both work full time, but I work full time 50 hours a week. I work at a job I really don't like because it does pay more. You work at a job close to home, maybe it's 35 hours a week, which is by the Bureau of Labor Statistics considered full-time, but he doesn't go through that in his mind. He just knows that he works more hours per week and does something that he likes less. Now, he doesn't say that to himself. He just feels, because men don't articulate, I do something I like less to earn more money. That is not in men's vocabulary. That's not in, we don't have a men's movement that helps people explain that to women. So women don't hear that, men feel it but don't say it. And so there's this anger that builds up inside of them, men, but it is also this anger that builds up inside of women because the woman is right there seeing him, just drinking the beer and having his friends over and not paying any attention to her, and her needs. And he doesn't say, well, wait a minute, you went out shopping X number of hours per week. When you went out shopping, you bought those shoes we couldn't afford, but you said they were on sale, but whatever, but that keeps me working that many more hours to be able to pay for those shoes. You wanted this house in this neighborhood so the kids could go to a great school. That's part of the reason I left my musician gig, or my elementary school teaching gig, and took a job selling product X, traveling all around the country. I don't care to do that. Men just don't express those things. They don't think of those things. It feels like whining to them. But it does on some level register. And that creates the anger that leads to the stress that leads to the need for the beer or the drinking, and also in worst case scenarios they keep it all inside of them, and then the volcano leads to an explosion, and that becomes a lose-lose situation.
So it sounds like the first thing she should do is appreciate him and say, I appreciate that you're working hard, and I appreciate that you help Susie with her math homework or whatever, that would go a long way towards undoing this pursuer-withdrawer cycle.
The answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. And it's hard for the woman because in this culture, as I was saying before, the 52 contributions to the home that men make, about 49 of them are completely unrecorded by the Arlie Hochchilds and Joseph Plex of the world, the people who do it, for the people watching this, the people who do the research on housework. And even the word housework is a sexist word because the contributions to a family are contributions that happen inside the home, like housework, and outside the home, like driving at night in an unsafe place when you're both feeling tired, and making the contribution of doing that driving, things that are just never even measured or mentioned or therefore thought of. And so it leaves men in this culture at this time feeling very unseen. And so therefore the appreciation is more important now, and the specific appreciation, like, I really appreciate the way you took, when you took the garbage out, that you remembered to put the extra cardboard in. And it was so nice of you to remember to recycle in the way you did. And that, that without even my asking, you brought the garbage back in again. Well, you tell a man this, and, if somebody is listening to this now, this is the really crucial thing. Every woman needs to know that when men feel needed, as in Uncle Sam needs you, we will die, so you will live. That's what men are about. We are designed biologically to be disposable if needed, when needed. And we will be disposable to you, for you, which is why 95% of the men in the workshop say that yes, they would in fact risk their lives at a 50% level to save the life of the woman, even when a quarter of the men in the workshop are considering a divorce. That's how powerful appreciating a man is. It's so biologically in our cellular epigenetic heritage.
One of the things men say the most is they feel nagged and criticized.
Yes, nagged and criticized is correct. So the criticizing we've just sort of gone over. The nagging, this is what that's about. It's the person who nags. The man feels like, not only does it come in the context of always being not appreciated, but it's also feeling like you're not giving me the time. You're not treating me like an adult. You're treating me like a
Mother,
parent.
yeah.
And that I'm some little kid that will not get around to it. And I'm not complaining. I'm not giving you a to-do list. You do your to-dos, and you cook a meal that may be really good, and maybe so-so at times, and maybe leftovers. And I say thank you. I don't have tomorrow you have to cook roasted chicken. The next day you have to do that's on your to-do list. And if it doesn't taste really good and it's not spiced right, I'm going to criticize you, that I'm going to nag you to go out and get spices that I really like, and that type of thing. That's not men's way of thinking, but they feel very belittled. Nagging leads to the man feeling like I'm being treated like a child and I'm being disrespected. Nagging feels like being disrespected. And every man intuitively knows, and every woman will agree with this, that it's almost impossible for a woman to love a man she doesn't respect. And when a man feels disrespected, he's feeling really on the brink of being unloved. But what men need to do, and what we need to do in our school system and in our culture, is to give men words for this, to have men feel like if they were bringing these issues up and they didn't have the type of skills that I have to talk about these issues, because I've spent a lifetime honing these thoughts, then they fear that they're going to be ripped apart, and that the woman will not only use her better emotional skills, verbal skills, but also if they start getting into an argument, the chances of being sexual or romantic or intimate have gotten less.
Hmm.
Men do not feel that women want intimacy more than they do. They feel that they're constantly begging for doing things, bending over backwards to create systems, create a feeling of intimacy that includes sexuality, but does not stop with sexuality.
Right. But Jed Diamond says that male violence stems from being disrespected and humiliated. That's the core of it.
Yes, I'd say that we have to remember two things: that both sexes are equally violent. Almost all the 200 plus studies that have been done of domestic violence in the home show that at every level of violence, men and women have about an equal amount of violence, and that these studies have been with us, and we've known about them since the 1970s, early 70s, when Strauss and Gelles did studies that included asking women nationwide, were you the first one to hit your husband? Was your husband the first one to hit you? And slightly larger percentages of women said, yes, I was the first one to hit my husband. And significantly larger percentages of men said the wife was the woman friend that I was living with, my domestic partner, was the first one to hit me. And every level of violence, like throw something at, stab, shoot but not kill, the woman was more likely to do that. And in most cases, with most studies, the women acknowledged that they were the ones that were more likely to do it. That just the women will be more likely to do it, like while the man is sleeping, or hit him or with an object. And so that all that data on that is in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say book, and so that the reason that that's important is because both sexes will be more likely to hit the other one when they don't feel understood, when they are constantly interrupted, when they're feeling disrespected. Women do it as much as men, but men will not report it and call the police station because they're afraid that they'll be thought of as the local wimp and they'll be laughed at the second that they hang up the phone. And when it's at the lower levels of violence, the woman is hitting him, and she gave him a black eye maybe or something, he'll go to work and say, I was playing basketball, I got hit in the eye, that type of thing, and he'll make up an excuse. We haven't trained men in the way we've trained women in the last 50 years, which is that when you're hit, speak up about it, report it, work it through, that it's a sign of that. So there's this belief system versus the data, and to give feminists credit, the feminists when Strauss and Gellis came out with their studies in the early 70s, the feminists were very skeptical of that, and so they went out and repeated the studies, and to the feminist credit, almost all of them found findings that were very similar to Strauss and Gellis's. And they reported them, and these were, most of the people doing this research were women, and most of the women were feminists in their orientation. There's two big gaps in this, two big things that I've left out. One is adolescence. The data with adolescents is not even women hitting men and men hitting women. It's about a 4 to 5 1 to ratio of women hitting men versus men hitting women and dating adolescents. The ratio becomes much more even when in marriage situations and in long-term living partners. The other one that isn't known is killing, and the killing a partner. And so statistically speaking, it appears that more men kill women than women kill men. But what that doesn't account for is that, and that's by a 50% difference, 150%. But the killing of men and the killing of women is measured differently by the FBI. When women kill men, the style of killing that women do is women who are wealthy usually hire somebody to kill the man, and women who are poor usually have their new lover kill the man. And there's almost always, what the common denominator of the women who are richer and poorer is that it's a contract, what's called a contract killing. The woman and man have a contract that when the man is dead, that they'll split the will. Well, men are almost never killed when they don't have wills. But they have to be killed in a way that makes it appear like an accident. Otherwise, the insurance company is not going to give them the money or that type of thing, or the will not be gone. So you have. We don't know, we only know that there's a lot of contract killings. We don't know how many of them, and if you add all of them up or even come close to adding them up, then it will be a lot more killing of the women killing men. But again, when the woman and man do it as a couple, it does not get recorded as a woman killing a man. It gets recorded as a multiple offender killing. So all of those are subtracted from the killing data.
Wow, that's interesting.
And all the background and data for that is in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say.
To be more mundane, how do you and Liz do housework?
Let us hope it's more mundane than that. we have a housekeeper, first of all, that does a very high percentage of the housework. And Liz and I basically do, the housework mostly that we do is cooking and, meals. So most evenings we cook our own meals. And about 5 to 6 evenings a week we do. And I will usually make the meat, the chicken, the fish. Liz will usually make up the vegetables. We'll usually share the making up of the salad. She does more cooking overall than I do, but that's our fundamental way of doing the cooking.
Mm. Do you have time for me to ask you about your predictions in Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say? I'm curious to see what's...
Yes, go for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Warren. This book was published in 2000, and these were what you predicted for the 21st century. So let's see how accurate. We should start with number 1. Fathers' issues will be to the early 21st century what women's issues were to the late 20th century.
I'd say about 10% accurate, 90% inaccurate. What I have always predicted is that men's issues, that men are biologically programmed to protect women. So when women complain or hurt, we compete with each other to be their heroes and their their protectors. Whereas when men complain, if women fall in love biologically with alpha men, not whining men. And when a man complains, it feels like a whining man. And so for women, a man complaining it feels like emotionally like fingernails scratching on a chalkboard. Is not a
wimp.
What's that?
We call them a wimp.
A wimp, yes, a wimp, or just it's just really the idea of a man complaining just is not appealing. Women fell in love with an example. Lois Lane had no interest in Clark Kent. But the moment she found out he was Superman, then it was fine for him to cry because he was Superman first. And so women are in favor of Superman expressing his feelings, but not in favor of Clark Kent's who's expressed their feelings. They're just sort of like, milk toast type of thing. And so that's the biology that we deal with. And so fathers' issues have taken if I were to have said by the end of the 21st century, fathers will have made enormous progress in relation to what was happening in the 20th century, then that would be a prediction that will probably fulfill itself. Fathers' issues have made progress in the first part of the 21st century. That's the 5 or 10% that's right. But they haven't made nearly as much progress as the women's movement made in the 50 years since it's been around. So anyway, that's so I would give myself a 10% maybe on that.
I think it's better than that because it used to be, and we talked about this in our other interview, that if a man was with a child in the park, people said he's weird, or oh, isn't that sweet? He's babysitting for his wife. And now you see men and children alone everywhere, and we assume he's a good dad. He's not helping her. He's not a creep. He's being a good father. So I think that's major.
Got you. And here's where I agree and disagree with that. That's what you're saying is absolutely true. If we see a child in the park with his children, with his father on weekends, but if in the middle of the day the father is taking a child or two to the park, the women are with other women who are having conversations and talking with each other about whatever they're talking about.
Or they're looking at their cell phones, more likely.
Listening to their cell phones, or what the kids did in school, or whatever. Or I got a text from my son or daughter, or whatever. And a man is in the park. He feels what I hear from the fathers that are with full-time dads, and I just interviewed two of them interviewed me yesterday, and this morning I did an expert witness test for experience, which I'll tell you about in a second. And the father, this morning's expert witness work that I did was a father where the mother had accused the father of being. She was very uncomfortable with the father having his 4-year-old son sit on his lap and rub and massage his back. And she was right there in court and has had no objection to that that interpretation on his part. That from her perspective, it made her. That's part of the reason she didn't want her son, 4-year-old son, to have any contact at all with his dad, because he did things that were so perverse, like massage the 4-year-old son on his back and had him sit on his lap. So, that's a little bit of, I often say that I should never be paid a penny for doing expert witness work, that this should be part of the culture, that we applaud that dad who would sit, his 4-year-old son in his lap, and we applaud him for massaging him and making him feel good and making him be emotionally secure and that type of thing.
Yeah, we're primates. Primates are always grooming each other, and
we want touch, and we know from Johns Hopkins studies and stuff like that a child that is neglected is the child that's more likely to die than any other single form of abuse.
Yeah, it's like the orphans in Eastern Europe who were fed and clothed but not touched, and they were terrible outcomes. Number 2, a male birth control pill.
Yes, we've made progress on that, but
really?
Not nearly. What did I say about the male birth control pill? That it would be
it'll alter men's lives and relationship almost as much as a female pill did for women.
Yes, I'd say that will hopefully be true, but it is not yet true. And it's a fascinating a fascinating poor prediction, in the sense that the pharmaceutical companies have the capacity now to have birth control pills. They've had it before I wrote the book in 2000, but they haven't marketed it. They haven't distributed it. They haven't done little perfections in it. And that is a huge marketing mistake. It's a pharmaceutical mistake, because many men know on some level that when you put your penis in a woman's body, you put your life in her hands, and you can prevent that from happening by having your own birth control pill, and especially if you're a wealthy man. You are having sex with a woman. You are, a very high percentage of the men that I do expert witness testimony for are doctors or lawyers, and they're fairly wealthy, and they now know that they were not loved, but the woman had sex with them, and then the moment she was pregnant, they just basically sued for divorce and wanted them and sued for money, and so they're in those types of status positions. But we again is another example of yes, we're making a little bit of progress toward that, but the progress is slower than even I would have predicted.
Fred Hayward went through something like that.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. 3, relationship language and our children. Grammar schools will make the 4 relationship language skills and being able to hear criticism part of required curriculum.
Beginning to happen. It's happening some places around the world, like in Denmark. But it's still math and science and reading, of course, of which I definitely want to be in the curriculum. Those are almost, they gobble up the curriculum. Communication skills and those 4 things are just beginning to be entered into the curriculum at a slower pace than I would have hoped for. And so, on all these things, the direction I am predicting is correct. The pace is more. The realistic outcome is slower than I hoped for.
Yeah, it's interesting. Number 4, protecting women. The legal system will confront the constitutionality of male-only draft, Violence Against Women Act, rape shield laws, women infant child programs, offices of women's health, and other laws to protect women more than men.
The first is true. All the rest are not true. Have not yet been brought about. So the first one
With the draft
is the mail-only draft registration. That's being reviewed by the Supreme Court now.
Oh.
But it had won an appeal in Texas where the female-only draft was required, but on the appeal it was refused. President Biden just issued an order a couple of weeks ago saying he would prefer for the Supreme Court not to review that. In other words, for women to have the privilege of not having to register for the draft, whereas your 18-year-old son still has the privilege. So progressive and feminist, there's no feminist group that I'm aware of that is saying, wait a minute, equality means equality of responsibility. Our son registering for the draft at age of 18, and our daughter is not equality. And so what I'm hoping for is that men and women will both have to register, but they will register for doing some type of service, especially in an entitled culture, and that the service will be given a lot of options. One will be you can join the military or register for the military draft, but the other will be, maybe if you have to be trained as a teacher to be in an elementary school and serve for a year in a dad-deprived community as a male teacher. Maybe if you're a woman, you could be a healthcare worker on the front lines, or be in the military and too. But that every human being when they turn 18 should have some service that they should provide for, and that could be a 6-month type of stint or something along those lines. But right now, women are the only group of people that have the option of voting without any responsibilities whatsoever or any expectations whatsoever.
When the ERA was proposed, opponents like Phyllis Schlafly said, we don't want our women coming home in body bags. And feminists said, well, we don't want our men coming home in body bags. So if you have equal responsibilities and privileges, it should be not gender-based. So feminists said, yes, the ERA would mean that women would be drafted.
They did agree with that, but there was no National Organization for Women chapter that made that part of the issue. That was basically kept under, or that said that should be, we want to make it clear. When Phyllis Schlafly put some of the feminists on the spot, some of the feminists would respond, well, that would include that. The usual response, though, was we shouldn't have a draft for anybody. Wars are things that men create, and that's and they should that's part of the male patriarchy is you guys all fighting with each other, and we shouldn't have to be dragged into it.
Number 5 is discrimination against men. Lawsuits will allege discrimination in hiring men as elementary school teachers, nurses, flight attendants, cocktail servers, secretaries, receptionists. Male affirmative action will become a political issue. The pay equity debate will reemerge. Guidelines to determine discrimination will become more complex.
That's happened a little bit, and it happened in the last administration to some degree. But that's there's one of the things that has begun to take place. There's some dimension of affirmative action that colleges are beginning to adopt, both quietly and sometimes not quietly, about since there's such a much smaller percentage of males going to college. It's about 59% of the people graduating from college are females, and about 41% males. And so some colleges and the women in college, the admissions people know that in many colleges women want there to be more males because for obvious reasons. And so there's a number of incentives for the colleges to sort of like quietly do a little bit of affirmative action of giving males who have lower grades or lower, or used to be SAT SAT scores. It's no longer an issue. But that is that's been the only form of affirmative action that has taken hold in all the other areas where that men that I mentioned, that's really not yet an issue. So again, the direction that I predicted is accurate, but the speed is much slower than I predicted.
Discrimination against women and its irony. Companies' fear of sexual harassment lawsuits, etc., will lead to underground discrimination against women as employees, especially in low and mid-level positions.
That is a more accurate prediction. That is the part of it that is most accurate is that I don't know of a single CEO that I've spoken to, which has only been about 15 or 16 CEOs that I've spoken with directly about this. But whenever I start speaking about gender issues, I don't even have to bring up this issue. But here's what will be volunteered to me. You know, Warren. I can say this to you if you make sure that you never associate my name with this. But the truth is, I will never mentor a woman again. Because I have a wife, I have children. There's no way, shape, or form I am not going to put my wife and children at risk if I mentor a woman. If I mentor her behind closed doors, I'm under suspicion. If I open the doors, I can have a word or a sentence picked up that would sound suspicious. I could be gossiped about. If I wait till after work and take her, we go out and we're seen at a restaurant, rumor could go around that we're dating. If I'm encouraging her to get to a position, but she never gets to that position, or she has children and she doesn't, get to that position fast enough, I can be accused of discouraging her or not mentoring her well. And there's absolutely nothing in it for me. Whereas before, I took pride in mentoring women. And people like Cynthia Epstein, who looked at the progress of women, found that even when there was male and female bosses who were easily both able to mentor women, that the males were more willing to do the mentoring of the women than the women were, than the female bosses were. So this is an enormous loss for women. Plus, what's happening is that people are becoming afraid of women in the workplace, and men with each other will make constant jokes with each other, and will do put downs with each other. And for men, the commerce of masculinity is the trading of weight covered put downs. And but I won't put down a man, and other men won't put another man down until they start respecting the man. Because when a man respects another man, then he knows he can play with him. Then he knows he can call him out on various things. And so that's very. And when a man does that with a woman and says, you really look nice today, or your shirt, did you get dressed in the dark and have no iron? No. Saying that to a man would be, just an invitation for the man to banter back at him. Whereas saying that to the woman is a future report to HR. And men are quiet about HR because they don't think that HR has anything to do with human. It should be called HER because it's almost always a complaint by her about him. And so the men are walking on eggshells around women, which says two things. One is that they are not respecting women because men respect people who can handle those put downs, can handle teasing, can handle banter. The office is much more pleasant from a man's perspective, when there's play like that. From a woman's perspective, the fear is that that when a man makes a comment like that it shows a disrespect for her. So what HR should do is facilitate communication between the two of them, so the woman has an understanding of what the man's intent is, and the man has an understanding that this is not going to having a woman around and playing with a woman like he plays with a man is not going to lead to the end of his career. What I applaud completely is #MeToo, but because it has helped millions of women speak up about their feelings and their fears. But I absolutely abhor #MeToo as a monologue. It needs to be a dialogue. And HR needs to facilitate that dialogue. When it's a monologue, what we develop is fear for women, a lack of respect for women. No, just like women don't like men who are victims, and it's like men don't like women. We don't respect women who are victims. We protect women who are victims. So our protector instinct is called forth when a woman complains or cries, but our respect instinct is not called forth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big something to think about. I mean, that's huge in terms of implication for women's ability to progress.
Yes.
Do you know of any HR people who are thinking about this kind of dialogue?
I don't know of an HR person that would allow me to finish those 20 or 30 sentences that I just said. That is how.
Really?
Yes. I mean, as soon as I mention something like that, there are millions of women who will go just like that. Yes, absolutely. But among the feminists who are what I call institutional feminists, that is ones who are in HR and HR people who are men as well, their entire ideology is on protecting the ones who are not in equal numbers, and in protecting women and protecting minorities. And in gender studies, there's institutional feminists there, and the basic belief is we live in a world dominated by a patriarchy in which men made the rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And so if I start speaking like that, I'm cut off before I even finish I might get a sentence or two in, but as soon as they see the direction that I'm going, I can't even get to the difference between respect and the other.
Wow, that's really something. That leads to the next question, and I'll let you go soon, is the lace curtain. I think you coined that term, and Jack Kammer, who I interviewed for the book, his first book, Good Will Towards Men, he definitely feels like it got the lace curtain. They had all kinds of opportunities at St. Martin's Press ignored, and they just didn't put any juice into it. So I'm assuming you'll say the lace curtain is still alive and well.
I only have about 100 examples of it.
Is that all?
It is. I'm afraid. When I was on the board of the National Organization for Women in New York City, every single op-ed I wrote was published by the New York Times. The New York Times only publishes about 1 out of 1,000 op-eds that it gets. But because I was in that position, not only was it published, but I wrote one op-ed twice as long as it should be. What ended up happening was not getting rejected, but getting 2 op-eds. They published it in 2 op-ed forms, part 1 and part 2. And since I've been incorporating empathy for boys and men into my op-eds and in my feelings, only one in the last 40-45 op-eds that I've submitted to the New York Times was published, and that one was because Michael Lewis had interviewed me when I ran for governor, and he recommended me specifically to his friend at the New York Times, and so who has since then left the New York Times, and so that friend looked at my op-ed and said, "Oh, this is really good," but that's the first, and then published it. But that's the only exception to that rule, and that's just. I can tell you nightmarishly sad experiences, about this.
Do you think it's getting better or worse?
Worse. Worse, the only area where it's not getting worse is when it comes to the importance of fathers and the importance of what's happening to boys, the boy crisis, like in the boy crisis book that I wrote. Conservatives get that. They understand the importance of the family, the importance of fathers, and the importance, and that boys are having major problems. They are willing to acknowledge that when they went to their daughter's graduation or their son's graduation, that 90% of the class of the honor society, the valedictorians, etc., were female, and so they see it. Among people that I tended to identify with, which is more politically liberal, the political liberals do not get that at all. They don't see what they're talking about. It's all woke culture, cancel culture. When you say so, for example, before I wrote one book and did not have a PhD. When I was on the board of NOW, I was asked to speak at Columbia University. I taught teach at Columbia University. I had residencies at Yale University. I taught at Brooklyn College. I taught at Rutgers. But today, even though I feel as supportive of women today as I ever have in my life, because I view the way that respecting women different than is current in the culture. I could not get a job at any major university, even though I've published probably as many or more books than anyone else on gender issues and any other male in the field. I would be shocked if a major university asked me to speak or responded positively to a request. And I don't mean speak, teach, but I also went from teaching at speaking at more than 50 universities per year, and you knew me at a time when I was doing that, down to 0 to 1 per year.
It has gotten worse.
Yes, it has gotten worse, but it's so much a part of our culture now that it's more like gotten worse at the level of the fish is the last one to know that they're swimming in the ocean. It's so naturally a part of what we think and believe that we don't see it as standing out anymore.
Is there anything else that you would like to add about understanding men so that marriages can last, so that kids have access to their fathers?
Yes. Just that there's about 9 different styles, differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. If you read anything in the Boy Crisis book, read that chapter, and it will really help you understand what are the things that men do as a dad, like roughhousing, like teasing, like the wood-covered put-downs, like the tough love, the boundary enforcement, the postponed gratification. Read that, and then dialogue with your husband, your boyfriend, the father in your life about that. But the most important thing that I think I have to offer is that everyone, we live in a world where no one hears anyone anymore, and that everyone, and so I hope we're on the precipice of beginning to know that the most important thing we need to do is have an open mind and an open heart, and it's not just an open mind, but as we hear people that disagree with us, to have an open heart. When I say open heart, I mean to understand the best intent of the persons on the far right and the far left, as opposed to making them into enemies, and to also recognize at the same time that the far right and the far left both tend to be very self-righteous. The far left tends to call itself progressive. What could be more self-righteous than calling yourself a progressive, and anyone who disagrees with you somebody who's not progressive, regressive? And what could be more self-righteous than calling yourself a patriot, which the right does, as you're saying that you're patriotic if you agree with me. That means everyone that disagrees with you is not treated with an open mind and an open heart. They're seen as being unpatriotic. That's the type of mental confrontation that we need to do with ourselves if we're going to move to a kinder, more open, more really, truly progressive society.
Oh, thank you.